The 16th century was coming to an end. It was the final day of the final year, and only 2 hours remained before the birth of a new year and a new century. The night was solemn and beautiful. Millions of stars paved the deep vault of heaven, and a crescent moon hung among them like a silver lamp. To the north, a shimmering stream of rosy light stretched across the sky like the tail of a massive comet. Every few moments, brilliant bursts of color broke from it, outshining the most spectacular fireworks. A sharp frost had set in, but the air was clear and still. Water sat frozen in thick masses around the public wells, and buckets were iced over on their stands. The main roads were sheets of ice, treacherous for horses and carriages, but the footpaths remained firm and easy to walk on. Here and there, fires were lit in the streets. Ragged children and beggars gathered around them, roasting scraps of meat on iron spikes or drinking deep from leather cups of ale and honey wine. Crowds gathered in open squares, watching the wonders in the sky. Most saw them as bad omens, believing these celestial signs predicted the death of the aging Queen Elizabeth and the arrival of a new king from the north, James of Scotland. Despite the early bedtimes of the era, few people were asleep. Everyone wanted to stay up to welcome the new century. Lights flickered in almost every window, revealing holiday greenery tucked into the glass panes. Whenever a door opened, a warm glow spilled into the street, offering a glimpse of families gathered around roaring hearths, playing games or sitting down to massive holiday feasts. Music and singing echoed from every corner. Groups of young women, escorted by their partners, went from house to house carrying large bowls decorated with ribbons. They shared a traditional spiced ale called lamb's wool, and in exchange, they usually received a small silver coin for their troubles. This was the scene on the final night of the year 1600. At 10 o'clock, a striking, elderly man stepped onto a small wooden balcony near the top of a picturesque building at the southern end of London Bridge. His hair and beard were as white as snow, the beard reaching almost to his belt. His forehead was high and deeply wrinkled, and though his face was deathly pale, it possessed a noble, majestic quality. He wore a simple black silk gown and a square black cap. This man was known as Dr. Lamb. Because he spent his life studying alchemy and science, the common people feared him as a wizard. Strange rumors followed him. Some even said he had a demonic servant, simply because he employed a deformed, eccentric dwarf named Flapdragon. As the doctor studied the stars, a loud crash suddenly broke the silence. He turned toward the Southwark Gateway, a stone tower topped with a forest of poles where the severed heads of executed criminals were displayed. To his shock, a tall man had just knocked down 2 of the poles and was stuffing the heads into a leather bag. The mysterious thief tried to escape down a rope ladder, but his path was blocked by the gatekeeper, Bald Red, who rushed out with a lantern and a polearm. Trapped, the thief threw the bag through Dr. Lamb's open window. Before he could draw his sword, the gatekeeper struck him over the head and stabbed him in the side. The thief collapsed. "Don't kill him, Bald Red," the doctor shouted from his balcony. "He may not be a common criminal. Perhaps those remains belong to his family, and he couldn't bear to see them displayed like that." "Maybe so, Doctor," Bald Red replied. "But I'm responsible for these relics. It's my head on the line if they go missing." "Who were they?" Lamb asked. 2 rebels executed 3 weeks ago," Bald Red said. "Father and son. Sir Simon Darcy and Master Reginald Darcy." "I knew them well," the doctor said, his voice trembling. "They were my own kinsmen." "What does the thief look like?" Bald Red held up his lantern. "A handsome youth. He's still breathing. Wait, I found his notebook." "You were right, Doctor. His name is Oriel Darcy." "Bring him to my house immediately," Lamb urged. "You will be well rewarded." As Bald Red lifted the wounded young man, Oriel groaned in agony. "Throw me the weapon you hit him with," the doctor called out. "I will apply a healing powder to the blade. His pain will vanish instantly." Bald Red threw the weapon up to the balcony, skeptical but willing to try anything. He carried the bleeding youth down a winding staircase to a lower room. Oriel's face was twisted in pain, his skin darkening as he neared death. I'm bringing the doctor a corpse, Bald Red muttered. If he can cure this boy from a distance just by greasing the weapon that hit him, I'll believe the rumors that he's in league with the devil. But as he watched, a miracle happened. Suddenly, the boy's muscles relaxed. His skin returned to a healthy color, and his breathing became calm and deep. Bald Red stared in disbelief. Now that the boy's face was calm, Bald Red noticed how strikingly handsome he was, with delicate features, a short mustache, and a pointed beard. Yet, despite his beauty, there was something unsettling about him. Even in sleep, his face bore a strange, almost sinister expression. Suddenly, and just as quickly as he had been healed, the young man bolted upright with a piercing scream, clutching his side. "You traitor!" he shouted, his eyes blazing at the gatekeeper. "Why are you torturing me? Just finish it. Kill me now." He collapsed back, overwhelmed by a fresh wave of agony. "I haven't touched you, sir," Bald Red replied. "I brought you here to help. You'll feel better in a moment." Then he whispered to himself, "Dr. Lamb must have wiped the blade." In an instant, the change happened again. The pain vanished from the young man's face, and he looked calm once more. "What have you done to me?" he asked, his voice full of gratitude. "The pain has stopped completely. It feels as if a healing balm was dropped into the wound. Please, keep me like this, or kill me, because that last pain was more than I could stand." "You are being cared for by someone more skilled than any doctor in London," Bald Red explained. "If I can get you to his rooms, he will heal you for good." "Don't wait." "Then," the youth whispered, "the pain is gone, but I feel my life fading away." Bald Red handed him a handkerchief. "Press this to your side and lean on me. Dr. Lamb's house is right here on the bridge. By the way, the doctor says he is your relative." "I've never heard of him," the youth replied weakly. "But hurry or it will be too late." Moments later, they reached the doctor's door. It was opened by a strange, tiny man wearing a coarse gray tunic and a leather apron. This was Flapdragon. With soot-covered skin, tired eyes, and a thin, bony face, the dwarf looked as if he had lived his entire life in front of a furnace, which he had. He was essentially a human pair of bellows. In his hand, he held the very weapon that had wounded the young man. "So, you've been playing Dr. Flapdragon?" Bald Red asked. "I certainly have." The dwarf grinned, showing sharp, wolf-like teeth. "Master told me to rub the weapon with the sympathetic ointment. I rubbed the steel point on both sides, wiped it clean, and then rubbed it again." "Well, you put the poor boy through hell doing it," Bald Red remarked. "Now, help me carry him to the lab." "I don't know if the doctor wants visitors." Flapdragon hesitated. "He's in the middle of a big experiment." "I'll take the blame," Bald Red said. "The boy will die if he stays here. Look, he's fainted already." They carried the unconscious youth, Oriel, up a wide oak staircase and into the laboratory. Dr. Lamb was busy at his furnace, working the bellows under a large glass steaming vessel. He was so focused he didn't even look up. "Put him on the floor and lean his head against the chair," the doctor ordered. "Wash his forehead with the liquid in that pot. I'll be with him soon. Come back tomorrow, Bald Red, and I'll pay you." "But these heads, doctor." Bald Red pointed to the leather bag on the floor, where a head had partially rolled out. "I should take them back." "Leave them. They are safe with me," Lamb snapped impatiently. "Tomorrow." Bald Red took one last nervous look around the room, shrugged, and left. Once the dwarf had finished washing Oriel's face, the doctor barked at him to get out so fiercely that Flapdragon scrambled out the door. Oriel slowly opened his eyes. He thought he was in a nightmare. The room was a chaotic mess of strange tools. Glass tubes, melting pots, and scientific instruments scattered everywhere. In one corner sat a giant globe. In another, a mysterious black book with heavy brass hinges. Near a leather bag containing severed heads lay a human skull and ancient scrolls covered in strange writing. From the ceiling hung a terrifying, scaly sea monster with its jaws wide open and huge, staring eyes. Two skeletons stood in the room, one hidden behind a curtain, its white bones gleaming in the moonlight, and the other standing near the chimney, its feet dangling in the rising smoke. Dr. Lamb worked on, throwing strange roots and powders into the fire. As he did, the flames changed colors, from deep blue to bright green to blood red. In the flickering, colored light, the room seemed to come alive. The glass jars looked like bloated, poisonous toads. The long tubes turned into writhing snakes, and the sea monster on the ceiling seemed to roar and flap its fins. Even the skeletons appeared to mock Oriel, waving their bony fingers at him. Oriel's head spun. He covered his eyes to shut out the horror, but he could still hear the strange noises of the lab echoing in his ears. Suddenly, a loud, joyful cry startled him. He looked up to see Dr. Lamb pouring a bright, clear liquid into a small glass bottle. The old man held it up to the light, looking at it with pure ecstasy. "At last!" the doctor cried. "The great work is finished. I was born at the start of the century that is ending tonight. But with this drink, I will live to see the beginning of centuries to come. This elixir will make me young again, like an eagle. I will live longer than any man in history." He held the sparkling liquid high, staring at it as if it were the sun itself. "To live forever," the doctor cried after a long silence. "To escape the jaws of death just as they open to swallow me. To be safe from every accident. It is a glorious thought. But wait, I remember now. The rabbi said there was one danger that the elixir cannot stop. One weak point, like the heel of Achilles, where death might still find me. What is it? Where could it be?" He fell back into deep, troubled thought. "This uncertainty will ruin everything," he muttered. "I will live in constant fear, as if an invisible enemy is watching me. But no matter. Eternal life, eternal youth. What more could a man want? What more indeed?" Oriel called out. "Ha!" the doctor startled, suddenly remembering the wounded man. He quickly hid the small bottle beneath his silk gown. "Your caution is useless, doctor," Oriel said weakly. "I heard everything. You believe you have discovered the elixir of life." "Believe!" Dr. Lamb cried. "There is no doubt. I possess the great secret that the world's greatest philosophers have hunted for centuries. The miracle that stops the body from ever decaying." "The man who brought me here said you were my kinsman," Oriel said. "Is that true?" "It is," the doctor replied. "And now you will see the bond between us. Look at that tragic sight," he added, pointing to the severed head peeking out of the leather bag. "That was once my son, Simon. His own son's head is inside that sack, your father. For generations of our family are in this room tonight." "Good heavens!" the young man exclaimed, pushing himself up on one elbow. "Then you are my great-grandfather. My father thought you died when he was a baby. There's an old family legend that you were accused of witchcraft and fled to avoid being burned at the stake." "It is true that I fled and changed my name," the old man admitted. "But the charges were false. I have simply devoted my life to the deepest sciences, studied the stars, and pulled secrets from the heart of nature. However, 2 crimes have stained my soul. I only hope my regret has been enough to wash them away." "Were they murders?" Oriel asked, shivering. "One was," Darcy replied with a shudder. "It was a cowardly, treacherous act, made worse by the fact that I was ungrateful to the man I killed. Listen, and you will understand. A Roman rabbi named Ben Luca, a master of these secret sciences, came to London. I sought him out and became his student. For months I worked in his lab, tending the fires and studying ancient books. One night he showed me a specific volume. Pointing to a page, he said, "These symbols contain the secret to creating the elixir of life. I will explain them to you, and then we will begin the work." The old man's eyes grew dark as he remembered. He explained the mystery to me, but he warned me that the formula was missing one small detail. Because of that, he said, there would always be a hidden danger. Oh, how greedily I listened! I stared at those symbols as he spoke, and my mind filled with visions of living forever in luxury and youth. At that exact moment, a demon whispered in my ear, "This secret must be yours alone. No one else can know it. Ha! Oriel gasped, startled by the old man's confession. The evil thought was acted upon as soon as it was conceived, Darcy continued. I drew my dagger and plunged it into the rabbi's heart. But listen to what happened next. His blood spilled across the book, soaking the page and blurring the symbols. No matter how hard I tried, I could not remember the formula for the elixir. When did you find the secret again? Oriel asked, fascinated. Tonight, Darcy replied. Within this very hour. For nearly 50 years since that terrible night, I have failed in every experiment. It was as if a film of blood covered my mind. I tried everything, chemicals, solutions, long processes of decay, but I could never turn the stone into the true elixir of life. Tonight, I decided to wash the blood-stained page with a powerful liquid. I left it to work and went to the window for some air. He looked toward the dark sky. I saw my star shining with a threatening light, and I couldn't understand why, since I felt so close to success. That was when you made your brave attempt at the gateway. After I saw who you were and told the guard to bring you here, I returned to the lab. To my amazement, the blood had vanished from the page. The secret was clear once more. Oriel stared at the ancient book with a sense of superstitious dread. I was so shocked that I dropped the bag I was carrying, Darcy said. Terrified of losing the secret again, I forced myself to focus. I built up the fire and began the work. And now you see the result. I hold the treasure I have hunted for decades. All the wealth in the world couldn't buy this bottle from me. Oriel watched his elderly relative closely but remained silent. In a few moments, I will be as full of energy as you are, Darcy whispered. We won't be a great-grandfather and his descendant anymore. We will be companions. Equals in age, strength, and beauty. Youth is fortune. Oriel, I already feel younger just thinking about it. You mentioned 2 crimes, Oriel reminded him. You've only told me about one. Darcy's tone shifted, becoming heavy with regret. The second was not as wicked as the first, because I never meant for it to happen. My wife, your ancestor Amos, was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I was so obsessed with her that I used every trick of science to try and preserve her beauty. I fed her strange diets and made her bathe in liquids distilled from roses and violets. Finally, I created a drink made from poisons, yes, poisons, thinking the effect would be miraculous. She drank it and died in agony, her beauty destroyed. I nearly killed myself in grief. I may find love again, but I will never feel that kind of passion again. He pressed his hand to his face, lost in the memory. The mistake you made then should be a warning, Oriel said. What if this drink is also poison? Try a few drops on an animal first. No, this is the true elixir, Darcy insisted. I won't waste a single drop. You'll see the effect in a moment. Like a snake shedding its skin, I will become younger than I was at 20. Then please, help me, Oriel groaned. Or I will die right here while you're busy trying to live forever. Don't worry, Darcy replied. I will take care of you. I know enough of medicine to guarantee you a full recovery. Then drink it, Oriel challenged. The old man raised the bottle to his lips but suddenly hesitated. I don't know what is stopping me, he said, his voice trembling. Now that immortality is right here in my hand, I'm afraid to take it. Then give it to me, Oriel cried. Not for all the world, Darcy cried, clutching the bottle to his chest. No, I will be young again. I will be rich and happy. I will go out into the world and enjoy every luxury, every song, and every beautiful smile. Life will be one long celebration. Now, for the trial, ha! But as he raised the bottle to his lips, a sudden sharp pain stabbed his heart. What is this? He gasped, stumbling. Can death take me just as I'm about to live forever? Help me, grandson. Put the bottle to my lips. Pour it down my throat. Quick, quick. I am too weak to move, Oriel groaned from the floor. You waited too long. Oh heavens, we shall both die, Darcy shrieked, his arm shaking and useless. To die with the prize right in front of us. He sank backward, grabbing a large globe to keep from falling. "Help me! Help me!" he screamed, his eyes filled with terror. "It is worth the struggle," Oriel muttered. With a massive effort, he forced himself up and staggered toward the old man. "Saved? I'm saved," Darcy shrieked. "Pour it in. 1 second more and all will be well." "Do you think I'm doing this for you?" Oriel hissed, snatching the bottle from the old man's hand. "No, never." Leaning against the hot furnace for support, Oriel ignored the old man's pleas. He put the bottle to his own lips and drank every single drop. The old man froze, his eyes locked on the youth until the bottle was empty. Then, Darcy let out one final, piercing cry, threw his arms into the air, and fell backward to the floor. He was dead. Flashes of light blinded Oriel, and strange noises rang in his ears. For a moment, he felt drunk and started laughing and singing like a madman. Everything in the room began to spin. The glass jars crashed together but didn't break. The furnace breathed out thick, choking vapors. The metal tubes turned red-hot. The globe rolled across the floor as if kicked by a giant, and the skeletons in the corner seemed to giggle and point. Even the severed head in the bag opened its eyes and stared at him with a frozen, stony look, while the ghost of the dead alchemist seemed to shake a fist at him. Overwhelmed by the horror, Oriel blacked out. When he woke up, the room was silent. The lamps had gone out, leaving only the bright moonlight streaming through the window. It shone on the cold, still face of the dead alchemist and the ancient book beside him. Eager to see if the elixir had worked, Oriel touched his side. The wound was completely gone. There was no pain, no scar, nothing. Instead, he felt a surge of incredible superhuman strength. His heart raced with excitement. He stepped over the body of his great-grandfather and threw open the window. At that exact moment, bells began to ring out from every church in the city. It was the start of the new year and a new century. Oriel looked out over the moonlit city of London. 100 years from now, he thought, almost every soul living in those houses will be dead, except for me. 100 years after that, their grandchildren will be in the grave. But I will live on. I will see every change, every new custom, and every moment of history. What secrets I will have to tell, if I ever dare to speak them. Just then, a gust of wind caught the skeleton hanging nearby, and its bony fingers brushed against his cheek. A chilling thought entered his mind. There is one danger to avoid, he remembered. One peril. But what is it? Shaw, I won't think about it. It may never happen. I'm leaving this place. It smells of death. He hurried out of the lab, ran down the stairs past the confused dwarf, Flapdragon, and stepped out into the cold night air. A man who would never grow old. This next part jumps ahead to the year 1830. The tone changes from alchemical mystery to a gritty, dark crime thriller, perfect for a new chapter in your audiobook. Chapter 1. The Ruined House. Vauxhall Road, 1830. Late one night in the spring of 1830, two men stepped out of a shady, low-end pub near Millbank and headed toward Vauxhall Bridge. They avoided the riverside path, creeping along the far side of the road instead, ready to bolt into the open fields if they were spotted. Whenever the moon peeked through the heavy clouds, it revealed two men who looked like walking nightmares. Their faces were haggard, marked by a life of crime and hard drinking. They had restless, fierce eyes, several days of beard growth, and wild, messy hair. Their clothes were little more than rags, shoes with no soles and old hats with the tops missing. The two villains. The first man, nicknamed the Tinker, was tall and thin with massive hands and feet. Despite being gaunt, he looked incredibly strong. His face was dark, repulsive, and covered in blotches from years of alcoholism. A blood-stained handkerchief was tied across his forehead, making him look even more ferocious. Hidden under his coat was a dark lantern. The second man, known as the Sandman, was shorter but built like a tank, broad-shouldered, bow-legged, and long-armed. He was a formidable ruffian with high cheekbones, an eagle-like nose, and a cruel, animalistic mouth. He had a stubby red beard and white eyelashes, Resting on his shoulder was a heavy wooden mallet. The dismal night. They walked in total silence, moving with quick, awkward steps. The river was quiet, except for the occasional splash of water or a distant cry from a passing boat. Across the water, the ancient towers of Lambeth Palace and the nearby church stood tall. The moonlight ran like a silver belt across the Thames, lighting up the penitentiary, a massive, fortress-like prison that was perhaps the most depressing building in all of London. The two men didn't care about the view. About 200 yards from the bridge, they suddenly hopped over a rail, ran across a field, and dropped into a dried-out pit to hide and talk. The plan. "You aren't lying to me about this, Tinker?" the Sandman growled. "Is the target really coming?" "Look, I can't answer for him like I can for myself," the Tinker replied. "But if his own words are anything to go by, he'll be there. I heard him say it as clearly as I'm talking to you. I'll be here tomorrow night at the same hour." "And that was 1 o'clock?" the Sandman asked. "Right around then." "Who was he talking to?" "To himself, I think," the Tinker answered. "Like I told you, I didn't see anyone with him." "Is he one of us? A thief?" "Bless you, no," the Tinker laughed. "He's a regular high-class gentleman. A real swell." "That doesn't mean anything," the Sandman muttered. "Plenty of rich guys practice our line of work. But he's got to be crazy to go to a dump like that house." "Maybe he is, maybe he isn't," the Tinker said. "It doesn't matter to us." "I guess not," the Sandman agreed. "Unless, you're sure it wasn't a ghost, Tinker? I've heard that house is haunted." "I'm not afraid of any living man, but a ghost is a different story." "Don't worry, you'll find our gentleman is real flesh and blood," the Tinker reassured him. "Now come on. Stop scaring yourself with old wives' tales." They climbed out of the pit, crossed the field, and entered a narrow street lined with a few lonely houses. They stuck to the shadows, crossing the street whenever they saw a street lamp. At one point, they hid in an alley to let 2 watchmen pass by. Once the coast was clear, they hurried toward a row of abandoned, crumbling houses. They had reached their destination. The houses they had reached, more than a dozen in total, were a crumbling ruin. Long abandoned due to legal battles, they stood unroofed, without windows or floors. These hollow shells had become a dumping ground for heavy junk. Old iron, massive blocks of stone, and rotting timber. After dark, the place looked so suspicious and dismal that no sensible person dared to walk past it. The Tinker led the way, skulking along the dreary walls. He pushed open a rotting door and entered. The Sandman followed, but even his hardened heart felt a chill as he looked around. The interior was a chaotic graveyard of machinery. Huge millstones, massive water wheels, steam engine boilers, and iron vats were heaped together in fantastic disorder. In the middle of this mess sat the giant, bearded head of a statue of Neptune, once the figurehead of a great warship, frowning at them from the shadows. Above it lay the prostrate statue of a nymph and a broken bust of a famous politician. On the left stood the headless body of a stone Greek warrior. In the flickering moonlight, these objects took on a terrifying life of their own. The jagged brickwork of the walls seemed to form a twisted human face, watching them from above. To cross the building without falling into the deep, dark vault below, one had to walk across 2 narrow, bending planks. The Tinker ignored the danger and jumped down into a hiding spot between a timber beam and an old boiler. He signaled for the Sandman to join him. "The ale I drank earlier has made me sleepy," the Sandman muttered, stretching out on the wood. "Wake me up if I snore, or if our ghost shows up." He had barely closed his eyes when the Tinker nudged him hard in the ribs. "He's here," the Tinker whispered. "Where?" the Sandman asked, his voice trembling with a sudden fear. "Look up." High above them, standing on the narrow planks, was the figure of a young man. He was tall and slight, with a military air and a mustache. His hat was off, and the full moonlight revealed his face, deathly pale and handsome, but with a strange, sinister expression. "He's walking in his sleep," the Sandman whispered. "He's talking to someone we can't see." "Why have you brought me here?" the young man cried out. His voice was so hollow it made the thug's blood run cold. What is to be done? Why do you beckon me forward? Fine, I obey. I will follow you. He moved slowly across the plank and disappeared through a broken window into the next house. Let's follow him, the tinker hissed. I don't like it, the Sandman whispered, his teeth chattering. We're going to see something that'll drive us mad. Shut up. It's just a sleepwalker, the tinker snapped. He crawled forward on all fours across the planks, peeping into the next house. For a moment it was silent. Then, a piercing scream ripped through the air. Something heavy crashed down with a thundering sound, and footsteps began racing back toward the window. The two thugs scrambled back to their hiding place just as the young man reappeared on the plank. He was no longer calm. He was staggering, his face even paler than before, looking like he had seen a vision of hell. Now, Sandman, the tinker yelled. Now's your chance. The Sandman didn't hesitate. He sprang onto the wall like a predator, raising his heavy wooden mallet. Just as the young man turned and realized he wasn't alone, the mallet crashed down on his head. He fell to the ground, crushed and unconscious. The job's done, the Sandman cried. Let's take him below and strip him of his valuables. Wait, the tinker said, shining his lantern on the victim's clothes. Look at these expensive rags. This guy is loaded. The Sandman grabbed the young man's legs to heave him into the vault when suddenly, the street door flew open. A stout man named Mr. Thornicoft, followed by two watchmen, burst into the ruin. There are the villains, Thornicoft shouted. They've murdered a gentleman. Seize them. He fired a pistol, the bullet whistling right past the tinker's ear. The tinker didn't wait for a second shot. He kicked the lantern into the vault to plunge the room into darkness and jumped down. Knowing the layout of the ruins, the thugs escaped through a hole in the wall and disappeared into the night before the watchmen could even find their way through the junk. Never mind the criminals for now, Thornicoft urged the watchman. Help me get this poor young man to my house. He's still breathing, but his head is badly hurt. They carried the victim across the road to a small house. A terrified maid, Peggy, held the door open. Lay him on the sofa, gently, Thornicoft ordered. Run and fetch a surgeon. And be quiet, Peggy. Don't wake my daughter, Ebba. I don't want her seeing this. Thornicoft poured a glass of brandy down the young man's throat. After a few seconds of gasping for air, the patient, the mysterious, immortal Oriel Darcy, opened his eyes once again. Imagine a place in the very heart of London so filthy and dangerous that even the police were afraid to enter. This was the Rookery. It was a labyrinth of narrow, muddy alleys filled with the smell of decay. Houses there were leprous with vice. Many had no windows, their frames stuffed with brown paper, and doors were often missing entirely. Laundry lines festooned with rags hung from house to house. In the cellars, dismal caverns that even a wild beast would avoid, people swarmed like insects. It was a hotbed of crime, where the air rang with the shouts of lawless men and desperate women. After fleeing the ruined house, the tinker and the Sandman ran all the way to St. Giles, arriving at a hidden lodging house just as the church clock struck 2. At the entrance sat a withered, dwarfish man in a tattered coat, puffing on a pipe. They called him Old Parr. Inside, the kitchen was a dingy mess. A few sinister-looking men played cards by a dim candle, while a soot-covered boy, the waiter, slept on a pile of coal in the corner. Standing by the fire was a man you couldn't miss. He wore a velveteen jacket with ivory buttons and a flashy silk necktie. But the most remarkable thing about him was his cargo. 2 black and tan spaniels peeked out of his coat pockets. A pug was tucked into his shirt. An exquisite Blenheim spaniel was held under each arm. A white French poodle and a terrier sat at his feet. This was Ginger, a dog fancier, a polite term for a professional dog stealer. He was a droll, clever rogue who knew every trick in the book to separate rich ladies from their beloved pets. The Sandman and the tinker sat down, exhausted, and opened Oriel Darcy's pocketbook, hoping for a fortune in cash. Instead, they found only papers. All this trouble for nothing, the Sandman cursed. Not a single banknote. But the tinker began to read the notes, and his eyes grew wide. Wait, there are secrets here worth £100 or more. Hanging secrets. What do you mean? Asked the Sandman. According to these papers, this guy Oriel is a wholesale murderer, the tinker whispered. And look at the dates. Some go back to 1780. He writes about things he plans to do 100 years from now. He thinks he's immortal, that he never grows old and never dies. Ginger, the dog fancier, strolled over, intrigued. A man who thinks he's a murderer and immortal? He's the perfect target. We'll treat his pocketbook like a stolen dog. We'll hold it for ransom and make him pay a high price for its restitution. The conversation then turned to the strange porter at the door, Old Parr. The tinker claimed that Old Parr was a living legend who had seen King Charles I beheaded and remembered the Great Fire of London as if it were yesterday. He says he once drank a magic potion brewed by a great conjurer in the days of Queen Elizabeth, the tinker said. Ginger laughed it off as an old wife's tale, but the tinker was serious. I knew a man 60 years ago who said Old Parr looked exactly the same then as he does now. Curious and skeptical, they called the old man in to join them for a drink, eager to see if they were dealing with another immortal right under their own roof. A chorus of furious barking announced the arrival of Old Parr. He was a grotesque sight, a dwarf whose head was far too large for his body, covered in matted black hair and a sealskin cap. His arms were so long they could touch his ankles while he stood upright, and his face looked like a mix between a middle-aged man and an ancient creature. His outfit was even stranger. Having worked as an actor, he was wearing demon dwarf stage clothes, tawny tights with green bat-like wings on the arms and a blood-red tunic. Over this, he wore a massive watchman's coat that trailed behind him like a royal train. As they sat in the dingy kitchen of the St. Giles lodging house, the tinker plied Old Parr with rum. The alcohol loosened the dwarf's tongue, and he began to describe a London that no longer existed. I remember this rookery when it was a green field with hedges, Old Parr squeaked. I remember when the Thames was clear as crystal and lined with noblemen's gardens. I was a page to the mistress of King Charles II, old Rowley himself, and I've seen him walking with a pack of spaniels just like Ginger's. Ginger was skeptical. According to your story, you'd be over 270 years old. That ain't natural. Old Parr dropped his voice. I was the servant of Dr. Lamb, the alchemist. On the last night of the 16th century, a wounded young man was brought to our lab on London Bridge. The doctor distilled the elixir of life, and that young man drank it and walked away healed. He continued, after the doctor died that same night, I found a tiny bit of the liquid left. I drank it, too. I felt like I had swallowed fire. Since that day, I have lived in poverty and distress, haunted by visions of my dead master. The tinker's heart raced. Do you remember the young man's name? It has escaped me, the dwarf muttered. Was it Oriel Darcy? Old Parr jumped up in shock. That was it. That was the name. How do you know it? The tinker realized they had a star witness. He handed the stolen pocketbook to Old Parr. Check these papers. Are they the same ones? But just as the dwarf reached for the book, a terrifying thing happened. Through the wooden banisters of the dark staircase above, a pale hand suddenly thrust forward. A heavy black cloak descended like a cloud, masking the figure behind it. The hand grabbed Old Parr by the back of the neck and lifted him into the air. The dwarf shrieked and struggled, but the mysterious force pulled him upward into the darkness. The dogs went wild. The sleepy waiter woke up screaming that he saw glittering eyes, and the tinker rushed up the stairs to save his prize, the pocketbook. The tinker searched the dark gallery, and the landlord opened every locked room, but Old Parr had vanished into thin air. There was no way out of the building that wasn't locked from the outside. The devil has flown away with him, Ginger cried. The villains sat back down in the kitchen, defeated. Their witness was gone, and the pocketbook was gone with him. However, Ginger held up a single scrap of paper. The old man dropped this bit of paper as he was taken. It might be the only clue we have left. A week had passed since the attack. Oriel Darcy was still staying at the house of the iron merchant, Mr. Thornicoft, slowly recovering from his wounds. One bright spring morning, Ebba Thornicoft stepped out into the front yard. She was a vision of Saxon beauty, tall, slight, and perfectly proportioned. Her skin was as white as alabaster, her eyes a serene summer blue, and her golden hair fell in radiant tresses over her cheeks. The yard around her was a strange contrast to her beauty. It was a forest of rusty iron, chains piled like fishing nets, old grates, safes, and even dismounted cannons. Artistic but eerie, the yard was decorated with rat traps and pulleys hanging from crossbeams. Ebba fed her linnet, patted her massive bulldog, and greeted the blacksmiths working at the forge. As Ebba stood by the gate, she noticed a tall man on the opposite side of the road. He was wrapped in a long black cloak. His features were handsome but fierce, with a sardonic grin and eyes that seemed to have the hypnotic power of a snake. Ebba felt a wave of terror. She was spellbound by his evil eye, until she finally managed to run back toward the house. At the door, she ran into Oriel. He was pale and his arm was in a sling. "That man in the black cloak. He frightened me," she whispered. Oriel's face darkened. "He is a messenger of ill. I am thankful he is gone." Inside the yard, away from the blacksmith's hammers, Oriel turned to Ebba. "I must leave your father's house today. I dare not stay longer." Ebba's heart sank. "Why? You aren't fully healed." Oriel looked at her with deep sorrow. "Ebba, I have become too sensible to your beauty. But I am a monster. I am bound by fetters of silence you could never understand. If you love me, you are lost, utterly lost." Ebba burst into tears. "Is it too late?" "It is, if to love you is fatal," she sobbed. Oriel struck his forehead in despair. "Then you are bound to me forever. I must fulfill my destiny." Suddenly, the bulldog growled. The man in the black cloak was standing right at the gate, a fiendish smile on his lips. "Leave me, Ebba," Oriel commanded. As she fled inside, Oriel faced the stranger. "You missed our appointment," the tall man said in a commanding voice. "I know about the ruffians and the ruined house, but you are well now. I will give you 3 more days. On the 3rd evening, at 7 o'clock, meet me at the statue in Hyde Park." The stranger glanced toward the house. "That girl must be the next victim," he said with a grim smile. "Silence!" Oriel roared. The stranger simply wrapped his cloak around himself and vanished. Oriel stood alone in the yard, the clinking of the blacksmith's hammers sounding like a funeral knell. "I will save her," he vowed. "I will see her no more." Instead of going back to say goodbye, Oriel turned and ran in the opposite direction, trying to outrun his own fate. The 3rd evening arrived, dark and heavy with the threat of rain. Oriel Darcy entered Hyde Park, his face deathly pale and his expression so wild that passers-by stepped aside in fear. With 45 minutes to kill before his meeting, he wandered toward the Serpentine River. Standing at the water's edge, Oriel contemplated jumping in to end his misery, only to realize that, for an immortal, even drowning might not bring the peace of death. Suddenly, he saw something struggling in the water, a small creature with green fins. Without a second thought, Oriel dived in. He reached the object and discovered it was an old man of tiny stature, dressed in a strange pantomime costume with leather wings. A rope was twisted tightly around the little man's neck. Oriel dragged the gasping creature to the shore. As a crowd gathered around the shivering water sprite, Oriel stared in shock. "It is Flapdragon," he cried. "My grandfather's attendant from centuries ago." The dwarf, the same Old Parr who had been snatched from the lodging house, opened his eyes. When Oriel asked how he ended up in the water, the dwarf replied, "I was thrown into the canal with a stone around my neck by a tall, dark man in a black cloak. I've been under water for days just trying to shake off the stone." The bystanders laughed, thinking the little man was a mad circus performer, but Oriel knew the truth. He paid a man to take the dwarf to a nearby tavern called the Lifeguardsman, promising to meet him there in an hour. Dripping wet and shivering, Oriel hurried to the giant statue of Achilles for his 7 o'clock appointment. As darkness fell and the wind began to moan, A hand touched his shoulder. Oriel spun around to find the stranger looming over him. The man's black cloak flared out like demon wings, and his marble-white forehead seemed to glow in the gloom. "Are you prepared to fulfill our compact?" the stranger hissed. "What do you require?" Oriel asked. "The girl," the stranger replied with diabolical exultation. "Ebba Thornicoft. She must be mine." "Never!" Oriel shouted. "I defy you!" The stranger seized Oriel's arm, his eyes burning with a withering glare. "Fool! Bring her to me before the week is out, or dread my vengeance." With that, the cloaked figure vanished behind the massive statue. As he disappeared, the sky broke open, and a heavy, freezing rain began to pour down on Oriel, who sat frozen on the bench, trapped between a demonic debt and the woman he loved. At 2 o'clock in front of Langham Church, Oriel Darcy accidentally runs into Mr. Thornicoft and Ebba. The meeting is awkward. Oriel had tried to flee to protect Ebba, but fate brought them together. Mr. Thornicoft is jovial, thanking Oriel for a valuable snuff-box he sent as a parting gift, but Ebba is worried. Oriel looks deathly pale, as if suffering from a deep mental burden. Ebba reveals a terrifying secret. The night before, the stranger in the black cloak appeared at her window. His eyes gleamed like a tiger's. He told her exactly when and where to find Oriel today. Oriel is horrified. He realizes the dark man is using Ebba to control him. Despite his fear, he cannot resist Ebba's invitation to dine with them. As they walk, he warns her again. "If you love me, you are lost."
In the quadrant, they encounter Ginger, the dog fancier we met earlier. He is covered in dogs and offers Ebba a beautiful black and tan Charles II spaniel named Fairy. Ginger is a master salesman. He claims the Prussian ambassador paid 80 guineas for a lesser dog, but offers Fairy to Ebba for 20. Oriel, distracted and wanting to please Ebba, buys the dog for £15 despite Mr. Thornicoft's warnings that Ginger is a rogue. While the deal is being made, the Tinker and the Sandman are hiding behind a pillar, watching Oriel. They confirm he is the man from the ruined house. Ginger sees their signal and realizes he has found the immortal target they've been looking for. As Oriel helps Ebba into a carriage to head home, the Tinker steps forward and grabs his arm. "I want a word with you in private, Mr. Oriel Darcy," he hisses. Oriel tries to brush him off, but the Tinker whispers a chilling threat. "You'll be glad to purchase my silence when you learn what secrets of yours have come to my knowledge." Realizing the pocketbook secrets are in the hands of these ruffians, Oriel lets Ebba and her father drive away alone. He turns to the Tinker, ready to face this new blackmail, unaware that he is walking straight into a trap set by 3 of London's most cunning criminals. Oriel follows the Tinker, the Sandman, and Ginger to a public house called the Black Lion in Great Windmill Street. Safely tucked away in a private room, the Tinker finally reveals their plan. They have read Oriel's stolen pocketbook and know his shirking secrets. "We finds you've been the habit o' making avy with a young woman vance every 10 years. The Tinker sneers. 1800, 1810, 1820, and now it's time again. They demand £300 for their silence. They even reveal they know about Dr. Lamb and the Elixir of Life, claiming they have a living witness, the dwarf Old Parr. Oriel is desperate to find the dwarf, but the ruffians only care about the money. Ginger pulls out a scrap of paper that fell from the pocketbook and begins to read Oriel's private confession aloud. "How many crimes have I to reproach myself with? How many innocents have I destroyed? And all owing to my fatal compact with..." Before he can finish, the door behind him opens noiselessly. A pale hand reaches through the chink, snatches the paper from Ginger's grasp, and vanishes. The 3 criminals are paralyzed with terror. "The hand again!" screams the Sandman. "It must be the devil," Ginger mutters, completely losing his nerve. One by one, gripped by superstitious fear, the ruffians flee the room, even refusing the purse of gold Oriel tries to give them. Oriel is left alone in his despair, but he isn't alone for long. He looks up to find the stranger in the black cloak standing beside him, wearing a demoniacal smile. The stranger drops the stolen pocketbook and the slip of paper onto the table. "I came to watch over your safety," he says chillingly. He reminds Oriel that his 10-year limit is almost up. If Oriel does not renew his compact by sacrificing another innocent soul, Ebba, the penalty will be terrible. "I will not sacrifice the girl," Oriel insists. The stranger's voice turns to ice. "You cannot help yourself. I command you. A new moon is born. When it reaches its first quarter, Ebba shall be mine." With that final, crushing prophecy, the stranger vanishes through the door, leaving Oriel trapped in a destiny he cannot seem to escape. If you belong to the legal profession in London, from the lowliest clerk to the high judge, you know Mr. Tufnell Trigg, dubbed the Barber of London. Trigg is a master of the shears and the tongue. His shop isn't a fancy West End salon. It's an old-school barber's haunt where the floor is carpeted with hair and the walls are lined with portraits of famous lords and pretty actresses. Trigg is a tall, thin man who carries himself with immense pride. He wears a black velvet waistcoat, a nankeen jacket, and a self-satisfied expression. His most prized possession is his magpie, a bird in a wicker cage that chatters incessantly and, according to Trigg, knows as much as any Christian. Trigg is looking for a new assistant, while his current apprentice, Watts, is busy singeing the hair of a sour-looking gentleman. A very strange little man walks in. He looks like a groom in a gray coat and top boots, but his face is bizarre. He has a projecting mouth like a baboon and a shock of black hair. The magpie immediately starts screaming, "Pretty dear, pretty dear," though Trigg thinks the man is anything but pretty. The little man points to Trigg's advertisement in the Times. He wants the job. "What are your qualifications?" Trigg asks skeptically. "I was a perruquier when wigs were in fashion. Back in Queen Anne's time," the little man replies humbly. Trigg laughs, thinking the man is joking or mad. "And I suppose you saw French periwigs when they were first worn in Charles II's time, too?" "I did," the little man says quietly. Trigg dismisses the applicant, convinced he is a lunatic. However, the sour-looking gentleman in the chair has been watching the exchange with interest. He asks the little man for his name. "I've had many names, sir," the man replies. "At one time I was called Flapdragon, at another Old Parr, but my real name is Gregory Morse." Recognizing something useful in the strange little fellow, the sour-looking gentleman tells Morse to follow him, promising to find him work. As they exit, the magpie gets the last word, shrieking one final "pretty dear," leaving the Barber of London to wonder just who he turned away.
At the appointed hour, Mr. Thornicoft arrives at a grim public house called the Turk's Head in Shoreditch. Inside a small back room, he finds the trio of rogues we know well, Ginger, the Tinker, and the Sandman. Ginger acts as the negotiator. He explains that while he is the sworn champion of distressed damsels and wants no money, his friends are not so selfless. The Tinker and Sandman demand £100 each to risk their lives. Thornicoft, desperate to see Ebba again, immediately agrees to the terms. Standing apart from the group is a fourth man, tall and powerful, with his back to the door. When he turns around, Thornicoft is startled to see the man's face is hidden behind a black crepe mask. Ginger introduces him as Reeks, the leader of the expedition. Reeks is cold and authoritative. He forces Thornicoft to agree to 3 strict conditions. He must never divulge anything he sees tonight. He must be blindfolded during the journey. He must obey Reeks' orders without question once they arrive. Despite his misgivings about the mystery, Thornicoft accepts. "I must perforce agree," he says, focused only on his daughter. Thornicoft is led to a hackney coach, and his eyes are tightly bound with a handkerchief. The carriage rattles through the streets for a long time, eventually leaving the noise of the city behind. The air grows fresher, suggesting they have reached the outskirts of London or the countryside. When the coach finally stops, Reeks leads the still blindfolded Thornicoft by the arm, whispering for him to be cautious as they walk along a wall. They pass through a door and finally the bandage is removed. Thornicoft finds himself in a large, overgrown, and neglected garden. In the center stands a gloomy, dilapidated old mansion. "We are now arrived," Reeks whispers. "You will have need of all your resolution." Thornicoft pulls out his pistols, determined. "I will deliver her, or perish in the attempt." The others draw their cutlasses. Following Reeks, the group creeps through a privet hedge to the back of the house. Reeks expertly opens a low window without making a sound, and one by one, the small army of rescuers crawls into the darkness of the mysterious house. Ebba awakens from her faint to find herself in a vast, cold hall made entirely of polished black marble. The room feels like a tomb. Beside her stands the dark stranger, who forces her to drink a potent stimulant that leaves her mind in a state of strange, dreamlike excitement. In the center of the room sits a table covered in black velvet. On it lies a ghastly lamp shaped like an imp, a dagger, a mask, and a piece of parchment. At the end of the room hangs a massive black curtain, flanked by 2 jet vases. The stranger leads Ebba to the table and demands she sign the parchment. Ebba reads the words and recoils in horror. By signing, she would surrender her soul and body to him. She falls to her knees and prays to heaven for protection. The moment she prays, the room is plunged into total darkness. Mocking laughter and wailing cries fill the air. Then, exquisite music begins to play, and the lights return, accompanied by the heavy scent of incense rising from the vases. Ebba looks toward the curtain and sees 4 spectral, masked figures pointing at her. From a side door, 3 women robed in black, hooded and veiled, emerge. "Who are you?" Ebba cries. "The victims of Oriel," they reply. "We loved him, and now we share his doom. You will be next." A booming voice from behind the curtain offers a final ultimatum. "Sign, or Oriel is lost forever." To show he is serious, the side door opens and Oriel is dragged out by masked torturers. A heavy marble slab in the floor slides away, revealing a dark, bottomless pit. The voice warns that Oriel will be thrown into this abyss to endure an eternity of torture, as his immortality prevents him from dying. In a desperate act of love and sacrifice, Ebba cries out, "I cannot save him so, but I may precede him," and throws herself into the pit. Oriel screams in agony as he watches Ebba disappear. A blue flame flickers from the abyss, and then a 4th veiled figure slowly rises from the vault. "Ebba, is it you?" Oriel gasps. The figure does not speak but walks to the table. To Oriel's horror, the figure picks up the pen and signs the name Ebba Thornicoft on the parchment. Her attempt at suicide has backfired, leaving her soul entirely in the fiend's power. As the name is written, a roar of diabolical laughter fills the chamber. The lights go out, and Oriel is dragged back into his prison, knowing he has lost Ebba to the darkness. A young, sinister man named Cyprian Rougemont enters a deserted house in Stepney Green. He is the descendant of a famous 16th-century Rosicrucian and alchemist, also named Cyprian Rougemont. Desperate for gold and driven by a demonic dream, he strikes a portrait of his ancestor, accidentally discovering a secret recess. Rougemont crawls through the opening and finds a door inscribed with a prophecy. "In 250 years I shall open." Since the date is exactly 1800, the door yields. Inside, he finds a magnificent septilateral, 7-sided vault lit by an ever-burning Rosicrucian lamp, a crystal globe containing a flame that has stayed alight for 2 centuries. In the center of the vault sits a black marble altar. Greedy for the treasure he believes is hidden beneath, Rougemont overthrows the altar, ignoring a ghostly groan that echoes through the chamber. Beneath the broken stone lies the perfectly preserved body of his ancestor, clutching a black vellum book filled with Kabbalistic spells. Reading the book, Rougemont realizes his ancestor's power came from a compact with Satan. Far from being horrified, Rougemont laughs. He breaks open the chests in the room and finds them overflowing with silver, gold, and priceless gems. He also finds a specific bottle containing a madness-inducing potion, the very same elixir that we later see him use to shatter the minds of his victims. The prologue ends with Rougemont swearing to use his new wealth to destroy the soul of Oriel Darcy. He identifies Oriel's weaknesses, a love of gambling and a passion for a woman named Edith Talbot, who lived in the 1800s, suggesting Oriel's cycle of tragedy has been repeating for a long time. 2 months after some unstated ruin, likely due to his gambling debts, Oriel is wandering Pall Mall at midnight, contemplating suicide. He is stopped by Rougemont, the descendant of the Rosicrucian we met in the prologue. Rougemont plays the friend, promising to pay Oriel's massive debts and make him one of the wealthiest men in London. Rougemont leads Oriel to a magnificent house in St. James's Square. The servants already treat Oriel as their master. Inside, Rougemont gives Oriel a strange, bewildering drink, the infernal potion found in the 1800 vault, which leaves Oriel feeling as though he is going mad. Rougemont presents Oriel with a pocketbook filled with an immense amount of money and the deed to the house. The condition for keeping them? Compact written on parchment. As Oriel reads it, he realizes the truth. Rougemont is a demonic entity, or a man possessed by one. The contract states that Oriel must deliver a female victim to Rougemont whenever required. If he fails, he is doomed. Driven by the immediate terror of a debtor's prison, Oriel signs the document. The moment the ink is dry, Rougemont's friendly mask vanishes. He laughs fiendishly and reveals his first demand. Edith Talbot, the woman Oriel loves. It is because she loves you that I have chosen her, Rougemont sneers. Seek not to love again, for your passion will be fatal to the object of it. Rougemont vanishes into the night, leaving Oriel as the master of a palace that is actually his cage. This explains why, 30 years later with Ebba, Oriel is so terrified. He knows that anyone he loves is marked for destruction by the dark man as part of this eternal debt. Left alone in the magnificent cabinet, Oriel finds the pocketbook on the floor. For a moment, the sheer scale of the wealth, £100,000, seduces him. He imagines a future where Edith's father, Mr. Talbot, could never refuse a man of such immense fortune. However, his conscience quickly returns. Realizing the soul-crushing price of this money, he hurls the pocketbook across the room, determined to flee the house and the bargain forever. As Oriel reaches for the door, a mocking laugh stops him cold. Though the room appears empty, the voice of Rougemont echoes through the air. It will be in vain to fly, the voice warns. Rougemont explains that the bargain is already spiritual and legal. Whether Oriel stays in the house or runs away, whether he spends the money or burns it, he is bound. To make the gift look legitimate to the outside world, Rougemont has even planted a fake note in the desk claiming the money was a debt of honor from a gambling win. Exhausted and broken, Oriel gives in. I must yield to fate, he mutters, locking the money away. To numb his terror, he turns once more to the antique flagon. He drinks deeply, and a drug-like euphoria takes hold. He falls into a dream of a beautiful garden with Edith Talbot. It is a perfect paradise until they reach a fountain, where a large black snake appears. When Oriel tries to protect Edith by crushing the serpent, it coils around his leg and sinks its fangs into him. Oriel wakes with a start from the phantom pain of the snake bite. A servant is standing over him, bowing obsequiously. The dream was a premonition. His wealth and his connection to Rougemont are the venomous serpents that will eventually destroy the very woman he is trying to save. He follows the servant to his new bedroom, moving like a ghost in his own palace, lost, fettered, and waiting for the seventh night. The next morning, Oriel awakens in luxury. As Rougemont predicted, the initial horror of the compact has begun to fade, replaced by the intoxicating power of his new wealth. He immediately sets out to transform himself into a gentleman of fortune, ordering carriages and fine clothes. He visits Mr. Talbot, Edith's father. Previously, the elder Talbot had looked down on Oriel for his lack of money. However, the sight of the St. James's Square mansion works a complete change. Talbot, a pragmatic and somewhat selfish man of the world, is now delighted to accept Oriel as a son-in-law. Oriel, haunted by the memory of the 7-day deadline, begs for an immediate marriage. Mr. Talbot refuses due to a business trip, but settles on a date. Wednesday next. Oriel shudders. Wednesday is the 6th day since the compact. The deadline for the delivery of the victim is the 7th night. He is effectively racing against the devil. That evening, Oriel meets Edith. She is described as a lovely brunette, with Oriental-style languor, glossy black hair, and perfect grace. She is the picture of innocence and devotion, making Oriel's secret guilt even heavier. He tries to convince her to elope in secret while her father is away, sensing that a public wedding will be intercepted. But Edith, bound by her own integrity and love for her father, refuses to deceive him. She insists on waiting for Wednesday. 3 days pass in a blissful, albeit anxious, dream. Upon Mr. Talbot's return, the subject of Cyprian Rougemont arises. "I hope you have not invited him?" Talbot asks. When Oriel inquires why, Talbot admits he has heard dark rumors about the man. Rumors so not much to his credit that he urges Oriel to drop the acquaintance entirely. On Tuesday, the day before the wedding, Oriel meets Talbot at a lawyer's office in Lincoln's Inn. In a move that stuns the lawyer and thrills Mr. Talbot, Oriel pays over £100,000 as a marriage settlement for Edith. He has now spent nearly all the blood money Rougemont gave him to secure Edith's hand. As he leaves the office, Oriel has neither seen nor heard from the fiend. He begins to hope that he might actually cheat the bargain. The wedding day is perfect. Under a bright May sun at St. George's, Hanover Square, Oriel and Edith are wed. For a few hours, Oriel believes he has defied fate. He feels that with Edith legally and holily linked to him, no power, human or infernal, can take her away. To celebrate, Oriel throws a ball of unmatched splendor. The evening begins with Italian opera singers and transitions into a grand dance. As the clock nears midnight, the deadline of the 7th night, Oriel prepares to whisk Edith away to Richmond for their honeymoon, hoping to leave his debt behind in London. As the couple tries to sneak away from the party through a private side hall, a tall man in black emerges from behind a scagliola pillar. It is Rougemont. "You thought to delude me," Rougemont whispers, "but you counted without your host. I am come to claim my victim." Oriel is paralyzed by terror. Rougemont, acting with smooth, terrifying politeness, takes Edith's hand and leads her toward the door, claiming the carriage is ready. Edith, confused but trusting her husband, follows. At the doorstep, the carriage and 4 horses are waiting. Rougemont gallantly places a cloak over Edith's shoulders and helps her inside. But as Oriel tries to step in after her, Rougemont delivers a shattering blow to his chest, knocking him to the pavement. Before Oriel can rise, Rougemont leaps inside, the door slams, and the horses gallop away at lightning speed. Oriel catches one final glimpse of Rougemont's face at the window, grinning with fiendish triumph. Mr. Talbot rushes out to find his son-in-law on the ground and his daughter gone. When he demands to know what has happened, Oriel, lost to despair, tells him the brutal truth. "She is in the power of the fiend, and I have sold her to him. He bought her with the money I gave you." The shock is too much for the old man. Mr. Talbot collapses and dies on the spot. Oriel, now cursed with wealth, a dead father-in-law, and a stolen bride, wanders into the night, commencing the long, immortal misery that brings him to our main story. Left alone in the occult chamber, Mr. Thornicoft's nerves shatter. He levels a pistol at the tinker, suspecting a betrayal, but the group soon realizes they are all in the same boat. The door is locked. To calm his nerves, Ginger, the dog fancier, decides to eat the pigeon pie and drink the wine left on the table. Despite Thornicoft's warnings of poison, the tinker and Sandman join in. Ginger, getting swipey, tipsy, on what he calls tokay, tells a cynical story about the beaks, magistrates, and how the law actually favors dog stealers over owners. The festivities are cut short by a violent clattering and rumbling beneath the floor. Suddenly, the shock. A massive electrical charge surges through the 3 high-backed chairs, paralyzing Thornicoft, the tinker, and the Sandman. The pinioning. Wooden hooks spring from the chairs to grab their arms, while iron fetters clasp their ankles. The helmets, 3 heavy, bell-shaped diving helmets descend from the ceiling. They drop onto the heads of the tinker and Sandman, muffling their terrified roars. The final choice. A hand from the ceiling holds the third helmet over Thornicoft. The monkey, who we now know is the dwarf Old Parr, asks if he will swear to leave. Thornicoft bravely refuses, and the helmet slams down, extinguishing him. The floor opens like a trapdoor, and the 3 chairs, with their helmeted occupants, sink into the vaults below. ### Old Parr's revelation. Ginger, left alone and terrified, is approached by the monkey, who reveals himself to be Old Parr in disguise. He admits he has a new master, the devil, Rougemont. Ginger tries to bully the dwarf into helping him rescue the others, but Old Parr is as slippery as an eel. He drops a chilling hint about Ebba. When asked if she is alive, he says he can only speak to the living, and is bound by an oath of silence. Determined to save his pals and Oriel, Ginger follows Old Parr through a secret panel behind the tapestry, pistol in hand, heading deeper into the lion's den. Mr. Thornicoft is revived from his faint only to find himself in a sepulchral room of black marble, the very place where Ebba was first tested. Rougemont, sitting on a black velvet throne, taunts the father before drawing back a curtain. There stands Ebba Thornicoft. She is alive, but transformed. Her skin is deathly pale, her limbs are rigid, and her eyes glow with a preternatural light. She is catatonic, a puppet of Rougemont's spells. When Thornicoft refuses to swear an oath to leave and never return, Rougemont shrouds Ebba once more, declaring he will never see her again. Thornicoft is dragged to Oriel's cell. Here, the 2 men face each other in mutual agony. Oriel begs for forgiveness, confessing that his love was the fatal link that dragged Ebba into this nightmare. Rougemont delights in this, shifting the blame onto Oriel to further torture the old man's mind. Suddenly, a powerful voice echoes through the passage, commanding them to hold. The masked man, Reeks, steps into the light and removes his disguise. He is Gerard Patton, the brother of Clara Patton, Oriel's second victim, from his long, cursed history. Gerard has been hunting Rougemont to avenge his sister and end the cycle of darkness. The rescue attempt turns chaotic. The standoff. Gerard levels 2 pistols at Rougemont, demanding the release of the prisoners. The shot. Ginger, the dog fancier, appears behind Gerard and fires a deliberate shot directly into Rougemont's chest. The result. Rougemont doesn't even flinch. "No earthly bullets can injure me," he laughs. The capture. Terrified by this supernatural display, Ginger flees. Before Gerard can fire his own weapons, Rougemont's masked attendants tackle him from behind and disarm him. Thornicoft was in a state of total shock. After the terrifying things he'd just witnessed, he was paralyzed with fear. He probably would have just stood there and been captured if someone hadn't grabbed the back of his coat and started tugging hard. He looked down and saw a tiny figure hiding in the shadows of a side passage. It was Old Parr. "Don't just stand there. Run!" the dwarf hissed, dragging Thornicoft into a dark, winding maze of hallways. "Where are we going?" Thornicoft gasped, trying to slow down. "Stop asking questions," Old Parr snapped. "Do you want to spend the rest of your life in a dungeon? If they catch you, you're finished." Terrified, Thornicoft picked up the pace. "I'm so scared I can barely move," he groaned. "I think I'm going to collapse." "Move!" the dwarf screamed. "I can hear them right behind us." Sure enough, the sound of shouting and heavy footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Thornicoft was ready to give up, but Old Parr wouldn't let him. "Think of your daughter. She's lost forever if you don't get out of here." That did it. Using his last bit of strength, Thornicoft sprinted forward. They hit a dead end, a closed door. For a second, they panicked, but the dwarf found a hidden spring. The door swung open just as their masked pursuers came into view. They slammed it shut, bolted it, and listened as the guards pounded fruitlessly on the other side. The moving walls. The danger wasn't over. As they hurried deeper into the passage, things got weird. "I feel like the walls are moving," Thornicoft whispered, dizzy and faint. "They are moving," the dwarf realized. Suddenly, thick, Choking smoke began to fill the hallway. Thornicoft was gasping for air, certain he was going to die right there in the dark. Then they hit another wall. A literal one. "We're trapped," the dwarf said, suddenly sounding very calm. "Well, you are. Nothing can really hurt me. Don't be so sure." A cold, booming voice echoed from above. It was Rougemont. Before they could react, a hand reached down from the ceiling, grabbed Old Parr by the neck, and yanked him upward into the darkness. Thornicoft was left all alone in the smoke. A familiar face and a new trap. Stumbling through the haze, Thornicoft nearly fell into an 8-foot-deep pit. He managed to climb down a ladder at the side, only to be grabbed by a massive hand. "Wait, Mr. Thornicoft?" It was the Tinker and the Sandman. They had escaped their own cells and were prowling the tunnels. "Have you found my daughter?" Thornicoft begged. "We saw a young woman locked in a room nearby," the Tinker told him. "But we can't get to her yet." Before they could make a plan, they heard a heavy thud. The door they had just walked through had locked itself. "We're being watched," the Sandman whispered, looking up in horror. "Look!" The ceiling was descending. They tried to run back to the ladder, but a massive iron plate slid over the top of the pit like a lid on a jar. They weren't just lost anymore, they were buried alive. Oriel woke up in a stone nightmare. He was chained to a massive pillar inside a circular dungeon, his hair matted and his eyes bloodshot. But when he looked down at his clothes, his heart stopped. He wasn't wearing modern gear. He was dressed in the velvet doublet and hose of the 1500s. Beside him lay an ancient book of black magic. As he flipped through the pages, Oriel began to spiral. He remembered living for over 200 years. He remembered seeing kings beheaded and empires fall. He remembered drinking a potion for eternal life and making a deal with a demon. "Was it all a dream?" he whispered. "Have I been insane this whole time? If the last 2 centuries were just a hallucination, then the woman he loved, Ebba, never existed. She was just a ghost of his madness." He found an old notebook in his pocket with his name on it, and it felt like proof. He wasn't immortal. He was just a man who had lost his mind. From the shadows, the villain Rougemont watched and laughed. His plan was working perfectly. He stepped into the light, also dressed in ancient clothes, acting like a concerned doctor. "Who are you?" Oriel shouted. "Is it the devil?" "Calm down," Rougemont lied smoothly. "You've had a breakdown. The year is 1600, and you're in the reign of King James. I'm just your doctor, keeping you here for your own safety." "And Ebba?" Oriel begged. "Is she real? Just a character from your dreams?" Rougemont replied with a cold smile. Oriel collapsed, his spirit completely broken. He was no longer just a prisoner of stone. He was a prisoner of a lie, trapped in a past that shouldn't exist. Darkness swallowed Oriel's cell. Driven to the brink of despair by hours of isolation, Oriel found a stray knife on the floor. "If I'm truly mortal, this will end the pain," he whispered, pressing the blade to his chest. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto his arm. Rougemont was back. "Suicide? You're more insane than I thought," he roared, kicking the knife away. Oriel begged to be released, but Rougemont played the part of the strict jailer. He forced Oriel to drink a mysterious, calming potion, though Oriel noted it felt more like a powerful stimulant. Now light-headed and suggestible, Oriel was led out of his dungeon and into a stone vault. There, he met the dwarf again, now dressed in peasant clothes and going by the name Flapdragon. The dwarf spoke to Rougemont with practiced ease. "Is your master still awake?" Rougemont asked. "Oh, Dr. Lamb never sleeps," the dwarf replied. "He's at the furnace as we speak, worrying about his poor grandson's mental health." Oriel froze. "Dr. Lamb? His grandson?" The dwarf looked at Oriel with fake pity. "Yes, Master Oriel. Your grandfather, Reginald Darcy. You're in his house at the south end of London Bridge. You've been very sick in the head, sir." Oriel was led up a spiral staircase into a room that stopped his heart. It was the exact laboratory he remembered from 200 years ago. The furnace, the skeletons, the magical scrolls. Everything was in its place. And there, sitting by the fire with a long white beard, was Dr. Lamb himself. Oriel fell to his knees, sobbing. "Are you real? Is this real?" The old man looked at him with a mix of kindness and caution. "You've had a terrible fever, my boy. All those visions of the future, the different kings, the changing fashions, they were just the delusions of your delirium." Oriel wanted to believe him so badly that he looked out the window for proof. Through the dark glass, he saw the jagged skylines of Elizabethan London and the ancient silhouette of old St. Paul's Cathedral. A heavy bell told the hour of 2. It was the ultimate trap. Rougemont hadn't just captured Oriel's body. He had successfully rewritten his mind. Oriel sighed, finally surrendering to the lie. "I am satisfied," he said. "I have lived centuries in a few nights. It's that time of year when the days are short, the nights are endless, and sensible people decide that night is actually just day with better lighting." London is in full-blown holiday mode. The streets are a chaotic masterpiece of Christmas spirit. You've got porters groaning under massive hampers of game, trains arriving from the countryside bursting with turkeys, and pastry cooks working overtime. In the windows of high-end butchers, prize-winning oxen are on display, decorated with holly like meaty works of art. If you walk down the street, you'll hear the jingle of scales at the grocer's and the sound of a piano drifting from a posh townhouse window. Sure, you've got the waits. Those loud, late-night carolers who wake you up just as you've fallen asleep, and the occasional grumpy neighbor throwing a bucket of cold water on them. But overall, London is basically one giant, festive party. It's the season where business takes a back seat to pleasure, and universal London gets a little bit tipsy. Tucked away in a cozy little corner of Westminster called the Sanctuary, a group of 5 jolly guys are gathered in a snug dining room. This isn't just a room. It's a time capsule. You can tell everything about a man by his house, and Sir Lionel Flamstead's place screams, "London history nerd." The walls are covered in old, worm-eaten frames holding maps from the days of Queen Elizabeth I. Back when St. Giles was a sleepy village and London Bridge was a row of palaces over the water. There are sketches of royal jesters, engravings of the Great Fire of 1666, and a literal gallery of every famous old tavern in history. The bookshelves are groaning under massive history books, topped off with a bust of the legendary Dr. Johnson. In the middle of this room, surrounded by vintage port and a massive bowl of punch, sits Sir Lionel himself. Sir Lionel is a retired merchant of the old school, the kind of guy whose word is as solid as a bank vault. He's a tall, stately figure who still rocks a pigtail, and don't you dare suggest he cut it off. He's impeccably dressed in a modified version of fashions from 30 years ago. Shoes polished to a mirror shine, a white cravat, and a black ebony cane. He's got a rosy, good-living complexion, a benevolent smile, and he's usually followed by a pug that is as smart as it is grumpy. As he sits there with his 4 best friends, the laughter is so loud it would split your ears. They're drinking the best wine money can buy and enjoying the holiday exactly the way it was meant to be enjoyed. In August 1830, I found myself in Rome during a massive religious festival at the stunning Santa Maria Maggiore Church. It was a sensory overload. The ceiling shined with burnished gold, the air was thick with expensive incense, and the beautiful music of the choir filled the massive hall. As I watched the crowd, I noticed a group of rugged mountain men from Calabria. They looked wild and out of place in such a fancy setting, but they were deeply devout, except for one man. He was an old man with a face like an ancient Roman statue, noble, rugged, and powerful. Despite his rags, he looked like a king. But something was wrong. While everyone else was praying, he sat against a marble wall with his eyes tightly shut. His hands held a rosary, but he didn't move the beads. He looked like a man haunted by a ghost. I was so obsessed with figuring him out that I didn't realize the service had ended. As the crowd began to leave, the old man rose, still keeping his eyes closed, guided by a younger man. His son. Was he blind? I didn't think so. Driven by pure curiosity, I followed him and clapped my hand on his shoulder. The old man spun around and snapped his eyes open. When he saw my face, his anger turned into absolute horror. He looked at me as if I were a monster, shivering and shrinking away until he nearly collapsed. Suddenly, a third man joined us, a wealthy Italian nobleman with a cold, sinister face. When he saw me, he froze, looking just as terrified as the old man. It was a mysterious triangle. These two men, from completely different worlds, were both looking at me as if they'd seen a dead man walking. The nobleman recovered first. He grabbed the old man and whispered a threat. The old man fell to his knees, begging, but the noble simply kicked him in the face and walked away. The old man hit the marble floor hard, blood streaming from his forehead. He instantly pulled a knife, ready to kill, but his son and a priest held him back. "I'll kill him," the old man screamed. "I'll go to the police. I'll confess everything and take him down with me." He pointed at me. "He will be my witness." I stepped in and offered my help and my wallet. The old man looked at me, stunned. "You'll help me, Signor?" "I will," I promised. "But tell me, why were you so afraid of me?" "You'll find out later," he hissed. "Don't follow us now, or you'll put us in danger. We will meet again." He vanished into the Roman streets. When I asked the priest who the men were, he played dumb, though he secretly ordered his guards to track them down. I spent the rest of the day searching the city for the old Calabrian, but he was gone. However, as I returned to my hotel that night, I saw a pair of dark eyes watching me from the shadows of the courtyard. The mystery was just beginning. The same night as the church incident, I went to the Colosseum. Under the rosy moonlight, the massive ruins looked beautiful but deadly. Suddenly, I saw a head pop up from the high stone walls. It was the old man, Cristofano. Before I could call out, he vanished. As I walked back through a lonely alley, I was ambushed. Someone grabbed me, blindfolded me, and whispered, "Keep quiet and you won't get hurt." It was the old man's voice. I was led deep into the countryside, stumbling over ruins for 30 minutes, until the blindfold was removed. I was under a massive ancient aqueduct. A fire was burning, and the band of mountain men were waiting. Cristofano handed me a drink and said, "Drink this. You have a lot to do tonight." Cristofano pulled me aside. "Years ago," he began, "a young Englishman who looked exactly like you came to Rome. He was handsome, wealthy, and fell in love with a beautiful Marchesa. Her husband, the man you saw me strike today, was a monster. He was unfaithful and cruel, but wildly jealous. Cristofano admitted he was the one who spied on them. He watched their secret meetings in orange groves. But the husband eventually found out. Driven by a psychotic rage, the nobleman vowed to steep his wife's own glove in her blood. He kept that vow. One night, while the Englishman was away, the husband snuck into his wife's room and stabbed her to death while she slept with her baby. He came out of the room holding a bloody glove. The Englishman was eventually killed, too, Cristofano hissed. And the baby? He was sent to England. If he were alive today, he'd be your age. A cold realization hit me. I reached into my shirt and pulled out a small diamond cross I'd worn my whole life. I saw that sparkle on the baby's chest that night. Cristofano gasped. I wasn't just a stranger. I was the son of the murdered Marchesa. The man who struck the old man this morning was the man who killed my mother. Justice is coming, Cristofano growled. The Marchese dies tonight, and you are going to be the one to kill him. We snuck into the nobleman's villa. It was silent, smelling of orange blossoms. We reached his bedroom. He was sleeping peacefully, the sleep of a man with no conscience. Cristofano woke him up by shouting, "Awake!" and holding up the stained, 20-year-old bloody glove. The Marchese jumped up, but when he saw me standing there, he froze. He thought I was the ghost of the man he'd killed years ago. "Is he here for vengeance?" the Marchese choked out. "He is," Cristofano cried, shoving a dagger into my hand. "That baby was him. That woman was his mother. Strike." I looked at the man who destroyed my family. I raised the dagger, but I couldn't do it. I wasn't a murderer. "He's a coward," the younger Calabrian shouted. "I'll do it for my father." He lunged forward and buried his knife in the Marchese's chest. But the tragedy wasn't over. In a final, twisted act of penance for his role in the original murder, Cristofano threw himself onto the dagger still in my hand. He fell without a sound, leaving me standing in the moonlight, surrounded by the bodies of the men who had defined my haunted past. The end.